Welcome to the Fight for Liberty. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Welcome to the Fight for Liberty podcast number 5. Yes, we're at number 5. Hopefully by number 10, I would say, we'll probably get some guests. So if you are a podcast listener who's listening through Spotify, we thank you for being here and listening on Spotify. Had to make sure my stream was good. We thank you if you're listening on Spotify. We thank you if you're just joining us here on the Fight for Liberty YouTube channel. It's nice to be back. I know I said it was going to be live yesterday on our Twitter page. However, I didn't end up going through with that live stream. I had prior commitments. There was that, and a few other things came up, but now we're here. We're live on YouTube as per usual. Lots has happened since the last time I have been live. A lot of news to cover, starting here at the top of the half hour. It is 6:34. We're going to do maybe about 10 to 15 minutes worth, probably 15 minutes worth of news, another 15 minutes worth of what concluding for the episode. Again, this is going to be a short episode. I said that before yesterday on our Facebook page, or on our Twitter page. I said that yesterday, that it will be a short podcast. I'm trying to kind of condense podcasts down a little bit to about 30 minutes. That way it's kind of easy for people to kind of, in a way, get in and get out of the podcast, and doesn't really distract too much from their daily lives. They can easily, have an attention span, hopefully, of 30 minutes instead of just me ranting on for an hour. But we are here. We're live now. A lot has happened. The Supreme Court Justice nomination, which we will get into, is probably the biggest topic right now. And as of today, the New York Slime put out a new article about the president's tax returns. Sorry, I saw some come up on our Gab account. So follow us on Gab, Parler. We can parlay on Parler. Follow us on Twitter. Over the past week, I was banned. My personal account, Daniel Chico, was banned from Twitter over calling Nancy Pelosi retarded for saying that she wanted to, in fact, impeach the president over the Supreme Court Justice nomination. So there's that too. But we are on Twitter. We have a new handle. I will get it for you right now. It is US Fight #4 Liberty. US Fight for Liberty. That's #4, US Fight for Liberty, on our Twitter page there. And we're going to get into the headlines now. Supreme Court Justice nomination was just announced, but today we're going to talk a little bit about right now in the opening segment about the hottest news coming out a couple of hours ago about the president paying only $750 according to the New York Slime. Now, how credible this is, we really don't know. The New York Times has been notorious for lying about what is actually happening when it comes to the Trump administration. They're notorious liars. So we don't really know if this is true or not. Remember, I think they were the ones that had that anonymous leaker or whatever, who wrote the book or something like that. But we don't know how credible they actually are. But they're claiming that in 2016, the year he ran for president, when he was elected in New York, he only paid $750 in income taxes. I really, honestly, when it comes to this, I really don't care. I could care less whether or not the president had spent $750 from his income tax. I believe that all taxation is theft. I believe that we shouldn't have taxation without representation, as the Tea Party stated all those years ago. And whatever we make, we should get the full amount. Now, people argue with the minimum wage thing is like, well, we need to raise the minimum wage. Well, let's try getting rid of this income tax completely first. You have more people spend more money, boost the economy. You'll have them getting all their money. So instead of just raising the wages, get rid of the income tax. You have way more people getting more money and spending more money, which results in better economy. But I think it's between him and the IRS, his business of how much he paid in taxes. I wouldn't care if it was Joe Biden. If Joe Biden paid, I mean, they came out with what was it in 2008 that the 2008 Trump tax return actually said that Bernie and Obama paid less, and Hillary paid less in taxes than Trump did in that year. But it still doesn't matter to me. If Biden only paid $100 in 2016, I wouldn't care. That's up to him and the IRS. That's between him and the IRS. All taxation is theft. That's what I believe here at thefightforliberty.com. In other news, everybody's going crazy because Dwayne "The Rock Cock" Johnson endorsed Joe Biden for president in a lengthy video saying how moral and upright the former vice president was. In fact, this is a disgrace from a steroid junkie like The Rock, who we think, again, these celebrities, we put them on a high pedestal thinking that they're so great, they're so lovely, and they are gods, and everything they do is just pure bliss to us, and that we should follow their orders. I don't really care what Dwayne Rock Johnson has to say. He's a liberal. He's always been a liberal. We knew that when he teased running about 2020, which he never did. He never followed through with that. And that his friend John Legend, well, I don't know if they're friends, said that he would leave. That's another top headline, America, if Trump is elected. Well, go ahead. There's a damn door, you idiot. So we're going through these headlines pretty fast today. Governor Newsom, California, the ever-failing state of the America, actually, the ever-failing state. California is done, in my opinion. It's really gone down the shithole, the shitter. It's flushed down the toilet. It's going to be flushed away soon. Wildfires, natural disasters, what else? Legalizing pedophilia, so on and so forth. Sodomy with a minor is now going to be a minor misdemeanor and all that. Just absolute trash filth in the LA area. There's just something about LA. I think LA is cursed with a occult witchy curse. I really believe that all those idiots down in California, people like The Rock and John Legend, so on and so forth, are part of that cesspool of crap, and it's really good to see artists and people get away from that and move out of that scene, which many have left LA, like Kanye West and Maynard James Keenan from Tool, if you're into heavy metal and so on and so forth. People like that, artists and musicians who have left, and they said, screw LA. Well, I'll never go back. But Newsom now, the governor of California, again, failing governor, says transgender inmates will now be housed based on their gender dysphoria, as I would say. He says gender identity. And other news, typical crap now. When I look at the news headlines, I'm like, well, I'm not so surprised anymore that California is going down to a more liberal, letting people shit and piss on the streets and letting gender dysphoria just go crazy. Forget about basic psychology. And these people always talk about basic psychology, basic biology, basic science. They act like they are the pro-science party of the Democratic Party, but yet endorse things that go totally against scientific basic biology and totally go against just frickin' psychology in general. So at this point, I'm not really surprised. Bernie Sanders warns that Donald Trump is a threat to our democracy. Okay, Donald Trump, he's a bad guy. I just ran for Hillary in 2016 and I ran for Biden in 2020. I am a sellout Sanders. Sellout Sanders. Sellout Sanders said that Trump is a threat to the democracy and the accuracy of mail-in ballots, which I see a lot of Democrats and left-leaning people who simply don't want to mail in their ballot. They don't trust it. General American people do not trust it. The people who can think for themselves, if you're on the left or if you're a conservative or if you're a moderate Democrat, there's people who actually can think for themselves who are part of that Democratic and lefty party and know that these mail-in ballots are completely invalid and they are a threat to our democracy. I hate the word democracy. We're going to be talking a little bit about that after the headlines here, and how democracy is always associated with the left, so on and so forth, and we are actually a democratic republic. Actually, not even a democratic republic. We're a constitutional republic. And also, the president today said he will strongly be demanding Biden take a drug test, which I think is fair. People have said that the president is on some kind of drugs, what do they call it, like Sudafed or something like that, like meth or whatever, synthetic meth. That's what the left's conspiracy theory is recently. And now, all of a sudden, when their president, Joe Biden, gets threatened to take a drug test, they don't want to do it anymore. It's like, well, I thought you said that the president was using drugs, but yet you don't want Biden to take a drug test or either of them at this point. So total, again, contradictions, double standards, as we see always from the left. I mean, at this point, it's not freaking surprising anymore. I'm not surprised at all from this crap that we're seeing from the Democrats and the left. Of course, Amy Coney Barrett was elected as the official Supreme Court Justice nominee coming up here soon. The vote should happen, I think, probably. I'm betting it's going to come up this week, at the end of the week, maybe midweek. I'm not going to say tomorrow. I don't see it happening tomorrow, but I do see it coming very, 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 very soon. And she is a devout Catholic who I've heard rumors that I can't confirm, but she is very pro-Pope. What's his name? Pope Francis? I forgot the guy's name. And I'm going to call Pope Francis out. If you believe in the Catholic Church and whatever, and you're a devout Catholic, this is nothing bashing your religion. You have the freedom and the right to practice your religion. And that's what the Fight for Liberty is about. That's what America is about. That's what we're going to be getting into later, too, in a little bit, in just a few moments here, folks, about the fight for liberty, freedom of religion, so on and so forth. Yeah, it's about that. It's about, if you're a practicing Muslim, I don't have anything against that. I'm not totally anti-jihadist. I'm anti these shitbags like Ilhan Omar and stuff who completely are working for the ISIS regime that Obama and the Bushes have founded, and completely against that crap. I'm completely against terrorism and all that. But, you have your right to peacefully practice your religion. You don't have the right to shove it down someone's throat and threaten them to death, whether that be Christianity or Islam. It's wrong. Or Catholicism. Now, the thing I have with Catholicism, and the reason why we're talking about the Pope a little bit, because that's going to lead kind of into the next segment, which I may just go into right now and just skip some of this news, because I'm not surprised by a lot of it, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever. Basically, the Pope, the papal bull, and the Pope, and so on and so forth, I see a lot of devout Catholics. There's a lot of good Catholics out there. I'm not saying all Catholics are bad or all Catholicism is crap. I believe that there was some really great saints at the very, very foundation of the Catholic Church, such as St. Augustine in his Confessions, which I have somewhere on my bookshelf here, which is a great book, one of the greatest books ever written. And that's more associated with ancient Catholicism and so on and so forth. There was lots of great saints who wrote Thomas Aquinas was another great saint who wrote a lot of great stuff, who had a lot of great philosophical, theological thought into his stuff. However, now the Catholic Church has become such a control thing, and I think we've really seen this happen with the Reformation in the 1500s, and it just explode of how it's becoming no longer a separation of church and state, because let the state be the state and the church be the church. That's just the principle of life. That's why America was founded. But the Supreme Court justice nomination, I do not like our Pope, or the current Pope. He's not my Pope. I don't consider him my Pope, but everybody thinks he's the world's Pope. I don't. I personally don't subscribe to that. But when people say our Pope, the Pope, I will call him their Pope. I don't like him. He has liberal policies, and I'm really worried about Amy Barrett's stance when it comes to abortion, as far as that, because Fight for Liberty is very pro-life, very, very pro-life, and abortion is just, we're going to do a whole episode on that alone. But yeah, it's just, I heard that she will take a stance with the Pope as far as abortion goes, which means he's more pro-choice. I don't know how true that is. I'm a little skeptical of her entering the Supreme Court and seeing how she does, because I did hear that that sounds illiterate, heard that she actually was sided with an Illinois judge to continue lockdowns and enforcing mask mandates. I can't say that word. We got someone outside. Yeah, I can hear that. I heard that's the rumor, that she actually would side with the Pope as far as abortion goes, and siding as more of a pro-lockdown judge, which makes me very skeptical of this pick. Maybe even disappointed if she does show her true colors, like Gorsuch, who I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a big fan of Neil Gorsuch. I thought he was going to be good when we first started. I'm a big fan of Kavanaugh. I think Kavanaugh was a good choice. Gorsuch didn't really side with the president like he should have. So there's that as well. Gorsuch and having two people who are not going to be pro-conservative is not good enough for us. We need all we can get. We need all three Supreme Court justices to side with the president. That's why he appointed them there. Side with your party. Don't frickin' go against grain. Yes, uphold the Constitution. If the president or the Senate or the House are doing something illegal, uphold the Constitution, challenge it. I really encourage that. Do that. That's what America was founded on. Don't let political parties, political identities, and politics get in the way of the Constitution. I fully agree with that, but also uphold the Constitution the way you should, especially with these mask mandates, so on and so forth, lockdowns, which we have seen that are, in fact, unconstitutional. But going into that and separation of church and state, sorry, keep drinking water here. The foundation of America, this is the bread and the butter of the episode here, was because the founding fathers wanted to escape the religious persecution that they had received from the Catholic Church. The Protestants and the Puritans wanted to practice their religion without being persecuted. Now, in other countries, Ireland, the Protestants were actually persecuting the Irish Catholics. That's a different story for a different episode. We'll talk about that later, and how England kind of got in there. I mean, England was a big problem because they were persecuting people who didn't believe what they believed. And once England turned over the Protestant, after the Puritans left England and founded America, once England turned to Protestant, the Protestant Reformation hit England, and that became a standard. They then started persecuting people who weren't freaking Protestant. It was bad. England was bad back in the day. They were really bad with that kind of stuff. They wanted control over Ireland, and Ireland still doesn't have all their country. And that's a big political debate too. That's a huge political debate. I think give Ireland back to the Irish. I'm sorry. They deserve their country. England has no right being in their country. And I'll say that for the Middle East too. I'll say that for Israel. I'll say that for the Saudi Arabians. Same thing. Let Palestine have their land. Golan Heights that the president assigned, one of the few things I disagree with him is him giving Golan Heights to Israel. He has no business giving someone else's land to another country who doesn't even own or deserve that land. That's not their land. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just the plain basic truth. And that's how England was thinking. So in a way, we're kind of England in that way sometimes. And we've seen that throughout histories where we had to colonize every freaking other country, especially the past 50 years with all these wars, the oil and all that. But when America was founded, we were trying to get away from that. So it all comes full circle, which is kind of crazy. Because we were trying to get away from that persecution, and that's why the Puritans came over here. They wanted freedom of religion. And the Enlightenment age, when we had all the scientists and scientific mathematical equations, geometry, astrology, so on and so forth, astronomy, and all kinds of things like that, which would be more of associated with, kind of a more ancient way of thinking, but then also more modern, I guess, more modern. And England didn't want to necessarily do that. They didn't want to change to be with the times. They wanted to stay in ancient times. So what the founding fathers did is they came to America, and people always paint this ugly picture right away. They say, well, right away they came and they slaughtered and pillaged native villages. But in fact, that's not what happened, folks. The Native Americans, who were the first people here. Yes, I do realize that. Again, I talked about this in a previous episode. I'm not going to get into the debate whether or not this or that, if we stole the land, so on and so forth. But it wasn't as chaotic as people want you to think. I remember growing up as a kid thinking, well, we did steal this land. Well, it's still up for debate, in my opinion, folks. Yes, we did a lot of horrible things. The colonizers did do a lot of horrible things to the Native Americans, but they also got hell of along with them. George Washington had a Native American guy during the time who unfortunately ended up getting killed in battle, but his name will go down in history. And we kind of adapted a lot of stuff from each other. We modernized them. They kind of helped us develop and organize stuff more formally. So we helped each other out, and not everything was a pretty picture. Obviously, there's the ugly side of history where when we gave them the smallpox and all that crap and all the horrible, horrible things. I'm not denying that there weren't horrible things that happened to Native American folks. There was terrible things that are just awful, slaughtering and the smallpox, so on and so forth. But that's not what this episode is about. It's about the foundation of America and how when we came here, or when the founding fathers came here, they weren't as bad as people make them out. They established tobacco fields. A lot of it was about property. A lot of it was about land. But a lot of the land was unclaimed and kind of like outside these certain territories were the tribes. So like, in Virginia, which was one of the hottest spots in the colonization of America, I might add, George Washington and Robert Henry Lee, Lightfoot Lee, and a lot of other people, a lot of other prominent figures in the foundation of America had colonized their tobacco fields and their plantations, so on and so forth. which we'll get into the plantations for a different episode, because that's another, now all of a sudden it's a big debated topic. But a lot of the founding fathers, like Richard Henry, was very against, not Patrick Henry, but Richard Henry Lee was very against slavery and making African American slaves. And George Washington, in fact, changed his mind after he became president, when he became president, about slavery. And so there's that too. A lot of people don't look at that. They completely ignore the facts of what happened to Washington and so on and so forth. He fought for a good 8 years just to bring this country to some kind of signing of the Declaration. We were officially signed into place. But the battle continued on after the Declaration, after 1776, all the way until he became president, which is late 1700s. 1787, I want to say. I don't want to be wrong on this one. But it was still another good 10 years when Washington took office. It was 10 years after the Declaration was signed into life, to found the greatest constitutional republic in the world. And it is a constitutional republic. Again, you'll hear it called a lot of things, such as a democracy. In fact, yes, we do have influence from the Greeks as far as democracy goes. He assumed office in 1780. Wait, let's see here. I got to get this right. This one's got to be right. I mean, he fought. This is his years of service in the colonial forces, 1759, all the way to 1759. He fought from to 1783. I mean, that's a long time to be fighting for the independence of America. And for 5 years of the time that he served in the military, he did get in office in 1789. So, I mean, we didn't have an official president, even 1776, until more than 10 years after the Declaration was signed, folks. That's crazy, but he didn't leave his men's side for 5 years. Until that Declaration was signed, he did not leave his men at all. He fought. He fought. And it's just beautiful the way his life was, because it wasn't a perfect life. George Washington actually didn't come from this big wealthy family, as opposed to some founding fathers who had, the plantations, and they were kind of born into wealth from England and brought over here and bought a bunch of land. Washington's family couldn't afford a really high-class education for him. At the time, a lot of people were going to these universities across seas, because, again, we didn't have any universities here right away. So as children growing up in the settlements of Virginia and the colonization of the colonies, Washington didn't have the education as other people of his peers did. So all he really knew was fighting for the liberty, fighting for independence. Now, John Adams, too, who's a great founding father who I admire, the Boston Massacre was a still very debated topic. Boston Massacre is a heavily debated topic, in my opinion. Still to this day, I still debate it within myself, because I think, well, were the guys protesting, so to speak, in the right to do what they were doing and throwing rocks and so on and so forth? But were the redcoats in the right to shoot? That is the question, I think. And history repeats itself, folks. With certain issues nowadays, you could say that is applicable. I don't know. Applicable. I think that's the word. Um, to today, the Boston Massacre and its relevance to today in history, I think it goes down in history as one of the most defining moments of the division. But John Adams, a lot of people didn't know, represented the other side that we fought against, which was England. He actually represented them in the court for the Boston Massacre. He was on England's side, and the Americans or the Patriots, what they would call them, Tea Party, opposed him for that, and a lot of them had bitter feelings thereafter, such as Sam Adams, his relative. So yeah, that's still a heavily debated topic, but to think that John Adams represented the other side at one point is kind of weird. I think that's kind of strange, Does it make me lose a little respect? Maybe, but I wouldn't know because I wasn't there seeing what actually happened at the Boston Massacre. So in a way, maybe he was right to represent England, because maybe these people who were protesting who were associated with the Tea Party and Tea Party movement, so on and so forth, were in the wrong. But who knows? Maybe they weren't. That's a very heavily debated subject amongst patriots alike. So yeah, I mean, there's very, like I said, it's all up to debate, and they want to think everything is just black and white. They want to create our reality for us. They want people to think that founding fathers bad, Marx and Stalin good guys, but at the end of the day, that's not what the truth is. The truth is we had a mixed bag of nuts. We have things that had to happen, things that needed to happen in order to get where we're at. They not necessarily all of them were good, but I mean, we see that throughout history, and we look at ancient history, and we see that that's what was evident during those times in ancient history, is the battles, and the battle rages on, the battle for freedom, the fight for liberty, like we have right here on this podcast. And that's what the podcast is about, that ever fighting good with evil, so on and so forth. And that's what the founding fathers basically were about. And like I said, not all of it was beautiful, not all of it was glorious, but the overall thought, the overall philosophical or political philosophy of the founding fathers was glorious. It was beautiful, and it still is a beautiful thing today. And I don't think enough people talk about it and talk about those men and how much they sacrificed just to give us what we have now. All those men that fought all those years ago, and fought for 5 years, like Washington, our first president, President Washington, and General George Washington, fought for 5 years, never left his men's side for 5 years just to found America. And still, after the Declaration was signed, there was still battles. There was still bickering and fighting and arguments and debates of whether or not we should do this or that. Now, there is a very interesting story I will tell you, very famous story, about how one day the founding fathers met, and they were debating whether or not to sign the Declaration, whether or not this was a good idea or that was a good idea, and just bickering amongst themselves, debating, and all of a sudden, now this is a rumor, this is kind of maybe a myth, I wouldn't call it a myth, but a rumor, more like it, is a mysterious man stepped in, and he said, just sign it. And everybody got really quiet. He said, just sign it. And they all signed it. And the rest was history. And they reports saying that people said that they never seen the man again. Now, that's a very infamous story amongst a lot of people. A lot of people don't know that story. It's kind of a crazy story. It's like, who was this mysterious man that just randomly stepped in that no one knew and just said, just sign it out loud amongst the noise of debate. Very interesting to hear things like that, and these little tiny stories that will go down in history forever that a lot of people don't know about, and a lot of Washington's life that a lot of people don't know about. And like I said, his educational struggles and how he didn't get a formal education as opposed to his peers who got a huge, they went to huge universities across seas, so on and so forth. His parents didn't have that kind of wealth. Yes, they were wealthy, but they weren't like wealthy. They were wealthy for people who lived in England, and England during that time was very, very wealthy. I know there was a lot of probably poor parts of England, but they were very, very, very wealthy in England. But they were probably moderately, lightly wealthy, the Washingtons were during that time. But Washington was a hunter. George really loved to go hunting, fox hunting in particular, during his time, which just sounds really fun. He loved fox hunting, and he got in different deals with land. He was inquiring about buying a lot of land. Obviously, Mount Vernon, one of the most famous pieces of land in American history, in history in general. His estate there where he's buried. Obviously, he didn't have that right away. He bought that off of, I believe, the Lees or someone like that owned it. One of the other founding fathers owned it, and he bought that from them, the Mount Vernon estate in Virginia. So Virginia was like a very popular area amongst the founding fathers to colonize, and a lot of tobacco fields back in the day. And of course, they had brought a lot of rum over from England as well, so they had a lot of alcohol, a lot of tobacco. It's kind of crazy to think that alcohol would be illegal just 100 years after that, or less than 100 years after that. About 100 years, a little over 100 years actually, 140 years or something like that, after all that occurred. But that's government for you folks. That's what they do, and what the founding fathers, and Jefferson, who was more of what now we would call more of a Democrat, a traditional Democrat, traditional liberal. We talk about liberalism, we talk about leftism. I think there's a really big difference between. That's what I talked about on the last episode. Is there's no more neoclassical liberals in a sense. They're not like liberals. Like Jefferson would probably be more considered a neoclassical liberal. I don't believe he was really. Was he part of the Federalist? I'm not sure if he was part of more of the Federalist Party, but I think he was a Democrat, in fact. Well, maybe Democrat. I don't think it was the term Democrat, but I have to double check myself. Let's fact check him, like Joe Biden says. Fact check me. But yeah, he was more liberal during the time, as opposed to someone who, like Washington, who was more of a federalist, constitutionalist. Now, like I said, we did adapt some things. Yeah, he was part of the Democratic Republican Party, so that's when both parties were kind of together. So he was one of the first Democrats, one of the first Republicans as well. So that's kind of where that democracy republic thing comes into play, because you kind of combine the two things. But we were influenced by democracy. We're not necessarily a democracy. We were influenced by the way Greek politics work, and our voting and so on and so forth, elected officials, and how they implement the votes and so on and so forth with the Greeks. And the Greeks had a huge influence on the founding of America, but so did the Romans. So did the Egyptians, so did England. All these different ancient cultures and more modern cultures at the time had influences upon our constitutional republic. Now, what separated us is we had a constitution. We had a rule for the government to follow, for a government to operate off of, which is the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Those are not for the citizens, folks. The Bill of Rights and the Constitution are not for the citizens. They're to keep the government in check. That's what they're there for. Us, we have freedom of speech, we have freedom of religion, but there are rules for them, the government, not to impede on those rights and those regulations and those rules that were established in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That's why they were established. Again, we the people. It's we the people, right? As the famous Megadeth song Peace Sells says, it is we the people. That's what founded by the people for the people. That's what this constitutional republic was founded for. Now, then that kind of gets into a whole think tank of society, and I feel like the media focus so much on what is opposing to us rather than what is for us. Again, patriotism has become now deemed white supremacy, which I see just... I just don't understand why patriotism has become associated with white supremacists, so on and so forth. I don't understand that, where they get that notion just because slavery happened. Well, you know what? Go to any other country and tell me whether or not slavery happened there. And I'll bet you 100% slavery is probably even 10 times worse than it was in America than it was there. We still have slaves. I mean, people in Bangladesh and that kind of area, kind of by India, are still being treated horrible. There's concentration camps in communist China that are treating people like modern day slaves. There's slave trades and sex trafficking trades in America, and very prominent in South America, in Asian countries as well. So to have this whole thing about slavery, in my opinion, is horrible. But to have it necessarily be about one race is kind of invalid in a way, because there's slavery happening all over the world right now and in the past. So to say that slavery was a sole issue for the African American community, it wasn't. There were slaves in Ireland, again, who were white. There were Muslim slaves. There was Muslims who had slaves. There was Christians who had slaves. There was Christians who were slaves, which we would see more in Armenia now. Christian persecution, Armenian genocide is happening, which is a totally different subject that I need to do more research about, because in that part of the world, they're making Christian slaves. So women were slaves for certain religions too. Not going to get into that debate, but so on and so forth. So this whole notion that white supremacy and slavery and all this is just all associated with race is totally irrelevant, because of the fact that, yes, slavery is an issue. Slavery is a horrible thing that should have never happened, but it did happen, and it happened to multiple races. So if you want to focus on slavery as a whole, that's fine, but to say it was only about one race would be totally invalid. And now we see all this whole race baiting thing, so on and so forth. And it's funny because I see people who are patriots and stuff getting persecuted as being race baiters, when that terminology even came from conservatives, and now they're using our own words against this, which the left-leaning people love to do. Now, again, I say the left because liberals is different. Liberals are more Kennedy-era Democrats, so on and so forth, or Jimmy Carter-era Democrats are the liberals. The left is more of a violent, radical, communist, Marxist ideology. Now, progressive, that word progressive, obviously it means to progress, but a lot of that terminology was heavily used by Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, which is basically the communist Bible for people who follow Marxism and communism. So there's that too. All these things kind of implement together, and what the constitutional republic and what capitalism has done is open opportunities for private property, private individual rights. Treat us as individuals. Don't treat us as group think, group tank, like the woke mob leftists like to do, and the communists like to do. The communists love that. They love the group mentality. They love the mob mentality. They love that because that's what their ideologies are based on. They're based on this group think thing. If you don't think like us, you are the enemy. You are the enemy, so on and so forth. They don't champion individual liberty, which what we need right now is individual liberty. We need more individuals. We don't need these blind followers. We need free thinkers. And I always encourage people, think for yourself. Even if you love the president, still think for yourself. Still question what he does, if it's good, if it's bad, so on and so forth. Evaluate everything that these people in government are saying and base it on your thoughts, your facts. Don't base it on because you're being persecuted for being calling a racist because you don't agree with certain laws or you don't follow these politicians that they want you to follow. No, forget about that. Be an individual, free thinker. Criticize the people that you like too. They need critiquing sometimes. It's natural and it's good and healthy to do that. And that's what America was founded on. It was founded on individual liberty. It was founded for liberty and justice for all races, creeds, and religion, like we said. That's why it was founded, because they wanted to practice their religion without persecution. And I believe that we should be able to practice our political thoughts, our philosophical thoughts, and our religion without persecution. That's just the basic foundation of why America was founded. That's why we were talking about the founding fathers earlier and Washington's long pursuit, 10, 12 years of just fighting for freedom of speech. And we are so blind and we don't realize that, people want to talk about privilege. They want to talk about all this privilege, you're privileged and whatever. The greatest privilege that we have ever been given, bestowed upon us by the Creator, is the privilege of being an American. Because we are more fortunate than 90% of the world out there, I would say. Sure, you have some good European countries. I'm sure it's nice, so on and so forth. It's a lot more expensive to live out there. The cost of living is 10 times more than we have in America. And we're complaining about wages and so on and so forth. Prices, gas prices, so on and so forth. Even the worst of America is the best. It's still better than any other country in the world. We have our flaws. We have our problems. We have a corrupt government. The system has been injected with poison, with money, with dark money, with globalist, elitist, financial bankers, foreign bankers like the Rothschilds and, Saudi Arabia and Israel and your Soroses and your Rockefellers to a lesser extent. Now Rockefellers aren't as prominent with their influence upon our politics nowadays. They were, probably like 30 years ago, even 20 years ago. But yes, they have injected themselves into the system. Now people say, well, the system's corrupt. The system's corrupt. The system, the way it was founded, wasn't initially corrupt. The injection, the virus, like the media being the virus, the globalist, Rockefeller, Rothschild elites that people talk about, those are the people part of the problem. To get them off the system, get them out of the system, get that poison out of us, like those people, would be the solution. Now, you also have people like the Federal Reserve and the IRS who play an important role of why things are the way they are, because the higher taxes and income tax, so on and so forth. That's why the poverty rate is so freaking high. It's not just the minimum wage, and people talk about wages and so on and so forth, which again is more associated with a leftist ideology, a communist ideology, because Marx and his great view was for the workers and so on and so forth. Another groupthink kind of thing, which is what was unions and so on. Unions were kind of introduced because of the Marxist ideology and all that. Again, what was I saying? I was talking about, the injection and how we need to get rid of that injection, that poison within the system, and the IRS and the Federal Reserve are part of that. I don't think Social Security, in my opinion, should have ever been started, because now when you take people off of it, basically the Fed has a grip on everybody right now. They have a grip on our taxes, Social Security, so on and so forth. The Federal Reserve has a grip on all that right now, and the IRS, so on and so forth. So what do we do? Where do we go from there? How do we get us away from that? Go back to gold standard, reinstate the dollar, or then we can reinstate the dollar, or so on and so forth. But right now we have paperless money because there's no gold in Fort Knox, so on and so forth. But how do we get rid of that? When they introduced the Fed, I think that's when the economy started slowing. That's when things started getting worse for America. It's when the Great Depression hit. So there's a lot of things that we have to work out, but we are still striving and we're still fighting for liberty. I'm Daniel Chico, your host. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. We will be back Tuesday night at 7 to do the debates between the president and former vice president Joe Biden. Tuesday, 7 Mountain Time, so that's like 9 Eastern Time, I believe. We will be back then covering that. That's going to be fun. We'll have some fun with that, laugh at some of the things that are going to be said. I'm sure it's going to be very, very entertaining, as the last debates were 4 years ago. And we will be doing a special Halloween stream coming up in next few weeks. I would say about 2 or 3 weeks, probably 3 weeks. We'll be doing a special Halloween live stream with the Fight for Truth, which we'll be broadcasting our first Fight for Truth podcast, which is more conspiracy-based podcast on that for the Halloween. We're going to be talking about some of the more horrific or crazy out there conspiracy theories. So please join us then in probably about 3 weeks, and do join us Tuesday. Follow us on US Fight #4 Liberty on Twitter. That's US Fight for Liberty. And also follow us on our Facebook at the Fight for Liberty. Follow us here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, please. Give us a like on this video. The Fight for Liberty podcast here on YouTube. Fightforliberty.com is our site. Find us on Parler on Fight for Liberty, and Gab at Fight for Liberty. I'm Daniel Chico, your host. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching. I appreciate everyone. We'll open up the phone lines in Tuesday's debate, probably concluding the debate. We'll cover a little bit of news before that, and then we'll get to it on the debate. So I will see you then. Hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday. I'm Daniel Chico signing off.